Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, people of all races, colors, and creeds, welcome back to the Investigative Journal. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, the greatest show on earth, and that's because we cover what others refuse to or are told not to. Yes, go to the Investigative Journal to listen to the Vatican-led New World Order, its global minions, and everything surrounding it, including the sham impeachment going on, a sign that America is on its last legs. If they can do this and let the American people listen to hours ad nauseum to this garbage and then get rid of a president based on nothing, you're seeing the American system of justice and the American government system being torn apart at the seams. They're dividing us into two groups, the globalists and then those who still want to see a country that is strong and vibrant like America. Now, it isn't the greatest place in the world, but it's better than a lot. And so I still would like to tell you that at the top levels of government, both the Republicans and the Democrats work together. It's called the Hegelian dialectic. That is why nothing gets done. So don't let these Republicans off the hook if what their arguments today sound like are good. Now, we know the Democrats are at it right now with 24 hours of nonsense about 2 articles of impeachment that have no crime. So basically, they're saying if we don't like the president, albeit there's a lot of people don't like Trump, but that's no reason to get rid of him. And they're going to try to do it. And they know they're going to lose. But what they're doing is just holding this system of government hijack. And you, the American people, are being hijacked of a country that should be government officials that should be working for you. And I'll tell you this, both the Republicans and the Democrats aren't at the top levels. And together they're putting this charade on. And in the end, what's going to happen? We're going to be pushed into globalism and socialism one of these days. So mark my words. And go to my show yesterday, and I talked all about it. Okay, I want to get back to the Noreen Gosch and Jim Rothstein story that I did years ago. And it kind of highlights this pedophilia problem we have in the country, these sex rings, all of the things you hear about, this depravity you hear about with Weinstein, the trial going on right now, with Jeffrey Epstein, with the Clintons, and with the Vatican, and all of these problems. Satanic worshiping going right to the foot of the Vatican is overlooked by our government officials. That's because they're all in cahoots. But anyway, to show you, I talked years ago to a police detective from New York who was assigned by the state governor at the time, this was back in the early 80s and the 70s, to crack down on these pedophilia or sex rings. Remember the Franklin cover-up, etc., that were going on in New York and all over the country. Well, he got information that led to the top levels of the Vatican, Cardinal Spellman in New York, as well as high-level officials in Washington, in New York, and other states. And guess what? He was told to stand down, or basically they'd kill him. I told that story many times over the years. What he did say was this, that the kidnapping of our children and all of these sex rings that are going on is the biggest terrorist attack in our country. And it's worse today, he said, than it was years ago when he started this in the 70s. He basically was pushed out of the police department in New York, and he started investigating privately for people. One person that he worked with was Noreen Gosch. Her son, she's the mother of Johnny Gosch, and when Johnny Gosch was about 12 years old, he was kidnapped off his paper route in Des Moines, Iowa, and it led to an investigation. Rothstein got together with her after the police at the local level, state level, the feds at the FBI stood down and allowed this to happen. Jim Rothstein got involved, and it's an interesting case, but it documents exactly how these work. And he said this, any investigation that goes to the top level of these rings, these sexual predator rings, never gets done. And if a person does, he'll lose his career. It's that simple. They're protected at the top levels by both the Republicans, Democrats, etc., etc. Now, Jim was a retired New York detective when I interviewed him. He investigated numerous cases of child sex slave rings and other things, which in many cases led right up to the top political figures and Vatican officials in our country. But nothing ever gets done. And this is the problem. And it's going on today more than ever. So let me recap. I've recapped a little bit. I've been doing this the last couple days, and I want to go back. We're going to pick it up with Noreen Gosch and Jim Rothstein speaking here. And this, let's see, is about 3 minutes into about a 3-part series that I have left. This is part 3 of 5. And let's see if we can make some headway here. And please listen up because it's an important story.
The police chief
Here we go.
made a press release to the Des Moines Register saying that the Gosches were nothing but damn stupid people. And that it was none of our concern to be investigating this case. And he actually swayed public opinion against us. And it became very difficult here because as rumor mills began, if you've got the police saying, don't help the family, nobody's going to help the family. And that's what he did. So with him at the helm, nothing was going right on this case. So after a couple months of this, I called all of the members of the city council on a Friday afternoon. And I told them that on Monday morning I was filing a $20 million lawsuit for negligence and naming the police chief. By Monday morning, there was a big article in the paper with his picture that the police chief was resigning due to stress on the Gosch case. And I found out that they had an illegal city council meeting in the basement of the police department to try and decide what to do after I threatened to sue. But I did not intend to sue. My accomplishment was to get him out of office so I no longer had to deal with this man that was covering up on the case.
Unbelievable. And this occurred how long after your son was kidnapped?
That took place within probably 8 weeks after I got rid of the police chief. And then about a month after the police chief was gone, he was arrested for stealing molly hooks and videotapes.
We're going to take a 3-minute break. Stay right there, and we'll be back with Johnny Gosch and Jim Rothstein. All right, we are back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. My guest is Noreen Gosch, and Noreen has been fighting a long, hard battle after her son Johnny Gosch was kidnapped, put in a pedophile ring, and basically in the first half hour of this show we documented those first days, showing without question the Des Moines Police Department was in the pocket of somebody higher up, and the police chief told his men to stand down when there was solid evidence on that first day that her son had been kidnapped. The story doesn't end there. It's been a long fight ever since that September 5th, 1982 morning when Johnny disappeared. And in the meantime, I want to mention this, that Noreen is one of the few mothers in this country that has walked the walk and talked the talk. She has gone and never stopped, gone the extra mile, never stopped in the face of government harassment, in the face of death threats. She never lost sight of the fact that she wanted her son back, and she knew that something higher up was going on. One point in the case, a man who's been on my show and is with us now, and I want both of them to speak together on this, came to help Noreen, came to her rescue in a sense to try to put his expertise in understanding pedophile rings from many years on the New York Police Department working in this area when he was told and basically his life was threatened for getting to the bottom of these things, and that means getting to the top of it. And he's talked about how his investigations were quashed in the same manner. Jim, are you with me?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Noreen, Jim is here, And I
Good
wanted
morning,
Noreen to just...
Good morning,
go ahead.
Noreen.
Noreen, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, so we got Jim and Noreen on. And Jim, we left off at a point where the police chief in Des Moines was decided to basically step down after Noreen threatened a $20 million lawsuit. We talked about this police activity in those first days. I just wanted to get your comments and about what Noreen talked about in the first half hour, what you saw as far as negligence on the part of the cops, and what really went down and how this operated. Go ahead.
Well, a number of years after that, I personally contacted at the time the person that was in charge of the so-called investigation, and he told me that nothing was done. In fact, the composite drawing that they drew up was just drawn up to pacify the people. It actually wasn't based on anything. So basically what they did was steer the investigation completely off to the side so nothing could be done. And just a couple of years ago, I met with the investigator who's now in charge of the case, and he basically told me there's nothing that's going to be done. So, and Noreen remembers when I was out in West Des Moines and met with these people because we had had a couple of meetings. So you can see that to this day, there is no investigation being done. And this happens in all these cases, or many of them at least, especially if they fall into this category that Johnny and the Martin boy and Wetterling and all these other kids were taking.
Okay, Noreen, how does Jim help you in this, understand some things? And together, I know you two are still trying to get to the truth. But go ahead, Noreen.
What was so helpful with Jim's expertise was the fact that he had, in fact, talked to the person in charge of the case at the police department and got the statement that they did nothing. It was one thing for the mom to say it, but it was very different to have absolute confirmation from another man who had been in the same profession and was a top investigator on these types of crimes. Jim has shared a lot of expertise in many situations that have come up since that time, including the latest visit with the man in charge now of Johnny's case, and also still got verification that they weren't going to do anything. That is very telling. That tells America what happened here. And it is vindication for me, for those who wanted to try to take me down or criticize because of what the former police chief had been saying about me.
Go ahead, Jim.
Well, we also have this contact in the missing and exploited children, and about a year and a half ago, he told me, he says, Jim, I now have to believe what you're telling me, that there's an active protection taking place here on certain cases that are not investigated. So even the missing and exploited people know that there's something going on here. And to me, that's a complete vindication, because when they started, what was ironic, I have been called on it, and guess what? They never brought me in on it, and at the time there was nobody in this country that had as much experience in this as I did. So now we know for a fact that this is going on.
Okay, we're just waiting on. I'm going to try to put the next segment on here, part 4 of this interview I did with Jim Rothstein and Noreen Gosch.
All right, now, in the first half hour, Noreen talked about how they did nothing in those first couple days. Tell us what you think was how this operated. How, the actions of the police chief were not the actions of a man who wanted to protect the community, but someone who was paid off, perhaps. How does this work? How did this police chief basically, how was he able to get this whole force to stand down when there was evidence showing that Johnny had been kidnapped?
Well, that's not hard to figure out. What usually happens there, and it doesn't generally involve payoffs, but some higher authority comes in and tells them, listen, this is a far bigger case. We're going to take this over, and we want you guys to stay out of it. And being a good doobie, following orders, the guy backs down. Although we are seeing that at the time, there was further involvement with the police in this underground. And I believe that's going on to this day. And it definitely dovetails into the Omaha, Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, and other parts of the country where this particular group has been operating for many, many years. In fact, there was an investigation done by one of the federal agencies from 1982 to 89 with 20 men assigned to it. And after the investigation, I personally interviewed this guy just a number of years ago who verified that 834 children were taken at that time, and nothing's ever been done.
Now, Jim, you've said in the past that this is the biggest terrorist threat that our country faces, that this problem has escalated since Johnny's kidnapping, that Johnny's case is a watershed case in a sense for people to really understand how these pedophile rings operate and how high up they really go. And you also said that Noreen has been probably the only mother that has stood up to these people and tried to get to the truth about their sons. Now, basically, our hope, you said, is for parents of other children who've been taken to all band together, that people who want to protect their children who haven't been taken yet to band together, and this is our only hope. And I wanted to get Noreen's comments about this and about what you've seen behind the scenes and why parents have been so silent, Noreen, and why you haven't. What is the difference between you and them?
I think the basic difference is fear. Many of them are terribly afraid to cross the line and question authority. And that becomes another whole issue. When it comes to something like that, I am no respecter of titles. If someone is hurting a child, if someone is covering up for the fact that a crime was committed, then I play on through. I don't take no for an answer. And I also was in a position where I did not have other small children at home. I was free to travel, free to go out on all the speaking engagements, rally people, do what I had to do to investigate. If I would have had other small children at home, it would have been much more difficult to do the traveling. But I do think in talking to other parents who have not stepped forward, like right here in Des Moines, there was 2 other kidnappings, I would have welcomed the help from the other families to band together to demand answers. But I think they were just overwhelmed by the police and they were told to shut up, and they did.
Now, Jim, you've seen this up close and personal with family members because you've investigated these cases from New York and from the East Coast to the West Coast. What's your take on this, and how can we get to the bottom? And that really means, how do we get to the top of who's still orchestrating these cases? What do we do?
Well, again, it goes back to information and the experience I got over the years of investigating these cases. At the time I was with the New York City Police Department, I traveled all over the United States to find out what was happening. And through this, I got to actually speak and work with people who were directly involved in this whole operation. And at one point, we had even worked with a group called the Policy Science Corporation, which was headed by a guy named Harold Laswell. And I remember at one time asking him, I says, I'm doing all this. I'm trying to get something done, but it's you hit the stone wall. And he's the one that told me, and like I said, these are things based on talking to a lot of people. And he's the one that told me you have to get the mothers to stand up and make the men and fathers do what they should do. And after all these years, and again, when I met Noreen, it was really refreshing that there was one mother who would stand up. And I do agree that many of them are threatened or told, and they believe in the system that the cops will do their job. But here's what happens. They're scared to say anything because they've been, you don't want to make the police mad, otherwise they're not going to investigate. Well, that's the greatest cover-up in the world. How can you make somebody mad that's not doing anything in the first place? And this is what the police use as an excuse not to work on this. But there's one other thing that comes into this is any police officer, federal agent, may it be the FBI, Customs, that works these types of cases, their careers are over. So you need, and there's plenty of cops out there that would do the right job. In fact, I've spoken to somebody just lately, and he told me it hasn't changed. And he says, if I take this type of cases, my career is over. So here's another point, that we need the people to back the police that want to do their job. That detective I interviewed in Des Moines, Iowa, that has Johnny's case now, there'd be nothing more than, he'd like nothing better than to open this case up, but he can't. So this is where the problem comes in, and Noreen knows this better than anybody. She's been right there. The only thing is she hasn't backed down.
Exactly, and to talk about your point, Jim, just for a second, that there are good policemen out there, and there's even a former policeman that listens to my show from Portland that wants to get in touch with you guys. He worked on cases like this in Portland, Oregon. He's now retired, and he wants to lend assistance. And I will get there. Off the air, I will get him in touch with you, Jim, so you guys can talk. So there are people that want to stop this problem because, look, Johnny's been gone for I don't know how many years now. He's in his late 30s. I want to get to this aspect of the story. Never during this time did they ever really investigate this case and bring him home. And still to this day, Noreen, is Johnny still under their control? And talk about this last visit, because some people get confused. How could he come home and then leave again? What's going on? How did this occur? What is your son like now?
What we have learned and what we've been told by witnesses that knew Johnny and were kept with him during their captivity. One in particular told us that he and Johnny had run away. They stole a car to get away. And they went to this young man's father's home. I was able to make contact. The father called me. Johnny stayed there for a few days. He did not realize that it was my son at the time because he was going by another name. Mm-hmm. And his son just told him it was a kid that he met along the way. This boy's father had no idea it was a kidnapped child. They stayed at this boy's house for a few days. Then Johnny left, and this man told me that he heard him say that he was going to try to find a place to live on an Indian reservation. Mm-hmm. A short time after that, America's Most Wanted did our story. When the man saw Johnny's picture, he realized it was the same boy. And that's when he got in touch with me. And he was a well-respected CPA in Wisconsin. But his son was also a victim of this network, and that's how his son met my son.
How old
Johnny
was Johnny
then went to live on an Indian reservation as far as we knew. But they were free to a certain extent from the group that took them, probably because they were starting to outlive their usefulness. They weren't cute little boys anymore that might be desired by a pedophile. They had reached another stage of development.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're going to pick the interview up in the second half hour. We're running into a break here. But I wanted to mention this was done in 2009. Okay, this was done in 2009, and as Jim Rothstein said, it's getting worse every year. So we'll get back with the Johnny Gosch interview in the second half hour. This is Greg Anthony, and this is FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can go to my website at greganthonysjournal.wordpress.com. Get shows going back well over 15 years regarding what I call the Vatican-led New World Order, back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This ain't happening.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal, and I want to get right back to that Noreen Gosch, Jim Rothstein interview I did about the sex trafficking pedophile rings in our country.
To him from that point, how old was he?
From there, and that would have put him at his late teens, early 20s when they escaped. Then we lost track of him for a very, very long time. And I was able to do a lot of television appearances. I did one in California right before Christmas in 1996. And they asked me if I wanted to just give a personal message to Johnny. So they brought the camera in close, and my message to Johnny was that no matter what had happened to him, I loved him. And I would do whatever I could to help him. But I didn't know where he was. And my address was in the phone book because I had moved from our family home. And I said, my address is in the phone book. Contact me. Well, several months went by, and then one night there was a knock at my door around 2:30 in the morning, and I went out and looked out the little security thing on my door, and there was 2 young men standing out in the hallway. And I said, who is it? And he said, it's me, Mom, it's Johnny. Now, that might not sound significant to anyone, but from the time Johnny was a little boy, if he ever came to, his brother or sister's room and they had the door closed, he'd knock and they'd say, who is it? And he'd say, it's me, it's Johnny. He used the same phrase. And I opened the door and I let them in. The one young man didn't say much of anything. Johnny's hair was long, dyed black, and he was deeply tanned, almost like he had darkened his skin with some tanning products. And he just went on to tell me what took place with him, how he was put into this ring, how he did break free. All of what I had been told was accurate, and that he and this other kid had been more or less on the run ever since. And I thought he was home to stay at that point. And he wasn't. He said he could only stay a short time, and then he would have to leave. And I offered to call my private investigator to see if we could figure out what to do and put him in someplace safe. And he said, no, you don't understand. He said, there is still a great deal of danger for me and for you if I were to come back. They don't want me telling my story. And
okay, Jim.
so he left.
Then he leaves, and Johnny was in his
left that night.
Then. Okay.
Yeah.
Jim, what happened to him at that point? What kind of control was he still under from your perspective as a detective in this? What was going on there?
Well, we know for a fact, I've seen it many times, once these boys are taken, you have 72 hours to get them back. And if you don't, and then even if you do, if the police officials that do this don't know what they're doing, they will never get the kid back. The kid will disappear again. But in Johnny's particular case, we were able to verify through a government source that he had in fact been brought to Chicago to lay the groundwork for Johnny going to see Noreen. So we know this is controlled, and it's been my experience, and in many cases I have personally interviewed people who were in the underground, and much of the information, in fact all of the information that Noreen had on Johnny fits in what my investigations had disclosed over the years. The Indian reservation and all that. There were many things that we verified, and this is why when people say, why didn't he go to the police? Well, why would he go to the police? In most cases, the police haven't done anything. So I don't know what police he would have went to help him, because there were none. And this is what happens, and this is why people have to understand this. We need help.
Exactly. Now, Johnny comes back for those few minutes with Noreen and leaves again, saying that there's still, I can't stay, Mom, because you could be killed, I could be killed. What kind of control, what happened, what are they doing to him to this day to prevent him? Basically, they're basically saying, you talk and you're dead, right?
Well, not only is he dead, but the family. And, again, I always like to use cases that I personally saw. We had a guy commit suicide in New York. And when we investigated, we found out that he'd been kidnapped at the age of 13 in Texas. And when we got to him, he was probably in his early 30s. And he was never able to go back. But he ended up committing suicide because his lover cheated on him. But so we know that this happens. And there were plenty of other cases where guys just never went home. Or they'll go there and then disappear again. We know that there is a well-established underground where these people can survive in.
All right. And so his life is in danger if he ever tries to come forward, and he really has nobody protecting him. The FBI to this day isn't helping, in a sense. Noreen, you had an experience with them, well, I don't know how, it wasn't that far, many years ago, when you actually got so upset with the FBI, with the officer who didn't want to do anything, that you threw a cup of coffee in his face. Tell us about that experience. So where can he go? Go ahead.
Yes, there had been another kidnapping that took place in Des Moines, and it was a very rich family, and the FBI jumped in and they got the boy back in 36 hours. Then they came over to my home. Herb Hawkins was the special agent. He was in charge of the whole 5-state region. And he came walking into our house and he said, oh boy, that was a tough case. We really had to work hard on that one. And he said there was a human life at stake. And I said, well, what do you call Johnny? He said, well, now, Mrs. Gosch, you're going to have to understand. The other family was much more prominent than you are. You have to realize that we had to enter that case and not Johnny's. And that's what that fool said to me. And I was standing at the counter pouring coffee for everyone. And I picked up the cup and hurled it across the room. I missed his head by about an inch.
Good for you. What a statement.
And then I ordered them out of the house. And he said, well, we can see that you're overwrought. I said, no, I'm not overwrought. I am so disgusted. I'm about ready to throw up on you listening to what you just said. How the other family's prominence and money made the difference as to why you entered that case and not Johnny's. I said, get out. And I threw them out of the house. And that was the last conversation I had with an FBI agent.
Now, we only have a few minutes left, but I promise in the weeks to come we'll have both of you on again. And my hope is from this perspective, I know this show, I know that you don't get much publicity anymore in the mainstream. They want to cover this story up, but hopefully the publicity that we get can prevent other children from being taken. And secondly, my hope is that Johnny will be able to come home because they won't have any choice. And I'll tell you this. That is my hope, that someday you can see him and live normally, because they have ruined your life. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it. They've taken your son away from you. Then they dangle him in front of you when he's in his mid-30s. And then he tells you this. I don't know how you've been able to survive, Noreen. In the last minute, tell us from deep within inside your heart, what's kept you going? I mean, this is almost worse than death itself.
I have a very positive outlook. I have a very deep spiritual faith, but I also remembered every day who was the true victim, and that was Johnny, not me. And I did not internalize victimization, because sometimes if you do that, it weakens you, because you then become a victim. And I knew that Johnny was the ultimate victim throughout this whole time.
A very good advice for those of you out there who've experienced any kind of loss that may help. Jim Rothstein, last minute here. Your thoughts. Can we ever get Johnny back home living a normal life, or have they basically done him in for good? I know that's not a good way to say it, but I don't know any other way to do it. Can we get him home?
Yes, and I can, if the right people are listening, I can tell you that I do have the connection now, that if he was to come forward, or any other person in this, that I do have the connections now that he can be helped, or whoever it is, and that something will be done.
Okay.
The word is out.
All right. Jim and Noreen, I want to thank you. We're all out of time. We will have you on in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I finished up that portion of the interview with Noreen, but I wanted to go back and give you a little background on an interview I did with Jim about where he comes from and a little bit about him.
Doing this investigation, just a brief recap of your story. We've talked about this on my show before, but you were involved in the highest levels of this type of investigation. Now, just recap a little bit about some of the top-level people, where this investigation went, how, one thing we have to emphasize is Morgenthau, who's still the district attorney in New York, who quashed this investigation, showing that there has to be a cover-up at the highest levels. Just recap this so people can understand how it operates. And you even say that it's worse today than it was 25 years ago.
Yes, it is, because you can add the Internet to it now, and that makes it simpler, quicker, and really tougher to work. By the way, the good news is Morgenthau's not running for re-election. And okay. I think anybody who in New York is listening to this, make sure you don't put anybody else in other than Crocker Schneider, who I worked with when she was a young district attorney, and I can assure you, you will see a change. The whole thing with Morgenthau, too, was we had already been working on it for years, and at one point we had information with an informant to put a wiretap into one of the biggest pedophile rings operating on an international level, especially into Washington, D.C., and the big businesses. And we went for the wiretap, and it was the best wiretap application I had ever seen. Everything was documented. And I never forget, we went up to his office, me and my partner, Matty Rosenthal, and we had a lieutenant with us, too, and they flat out denied to give us the wiretap order. And then they sent their investigators out and raided the place and seized the files so that we couldn't get them, because these files were the thing that would have capped our investigation, and we could have taken down probably the biggest pedophile operation that ever existed in the world. So that's one part of it. that I was personally involved with and saw what happened. So
I know you had some choice words for Morgenthau. Basically,
yes, we did, but we can't say them on the air.
How did you coexist with those people after that?
We didn't. It became an all-out effort at that point to stop us, and what they did is they compromised our lead counsel at the time by using some work he had done in what was known as the Huey Mulligan grand jury investigation, which was a corruption investigation, and they compromised our counsel, and that's how they stopped us. So that was when we were with the New York State Select Committee on Crime.
Right. So basically their intentions from Morgenthau on down was to cover up the evidence so that the higher level people would be protected. One of these persons they were protecting was a late Cardinal Spellman. Just recap for our listeners what you found out about him, because there are still people in this country who could not believe that someone wearing a robe like his could be involved in such evil. Go ahead.
Well, that was a very interesting investigation. And on the same point, they yet vilified Father Bruce Ritter, who had done what he was supposed to do. But as far as Spellman went, we very early in our investigations, we found out that he was known as Nellie, and I had one of the pimps that supplied him with the little boys was one of my informants. And at that time, the informant told me, if you ever get trouble or you get any heat from Spellman, here is the name, and he gave me the name of one of the kids that had been molested. In fact, that kid got caught in the Cardinal's residence, and they accused him of being a burglar because when the people came in, he ran off wearing the Cardinal shoes, and he was arrested. And the next day at the arraignment, naturally, the Cardinal forgave him for being such a how would you say it, a misled youth to go steal his shoes. And that was the end of it. But that was the information I needed to keep him at bay and not bother me. So I never had any trouble with Spellman myself. But we knew all about what it was. Like I say, I had the pedophile that supplied the kids to him.
And they used to call him Nellie in those circles?
Yes, they did.
That was his nickname?
That was his nickname in the pedophile world, yes.
Now, you also mentioned, and this is the connection that I tried to make with the hierarchy of some of the Vatican, and that is their connection to the control of our foreign and domestic policies. You also termed Spellman as one of the most powerful people in New York. And just for our listeners, from your point of view and in investigations, what kind of power did this man wield behind the scenes?
Well,
the Cardinal was supposed to be saving souls. What was his real purpose in life?
His real purpose was power. And a very simple story is, one night there was a young rookie cop up on Fifth Avenue on his patrol, and early in the morning, about 2:30 or so, this old guy comes walking down the street and talks to this cop, and he invites the cop in for a cup of coffee. And they go in, and when the cop comes back out, the sergeant's looking for him, and what we used to call, he wrote him up for being off post. So the next night, the young guy is out there again, and here's the old guy again, and the old guy says, well, how are you today? He says, well, not very good. He says, last night when I went in for a coffee, the sergeant wrote me up for being off post. Oh, he says, I'll take care of that. And within a matter of minutes, the patrol car comes and picks this cop up, and they say to him, what the heck is going on here? And he says, why? He says, what did I do wrong? He says, well, they want you at the station house. So they go to the station house, and here is the police commissioner and everybody, and apologizing to this cop, and he got promoted. You know, they took him off the street and gave him a good job, and the complaint he had against him was gone away, and everything was taken care of. So you can see if a guy like that can handle something so simple, especially inside the police department within minutes, it just shows you the power that he has.
And that was Spellman, the old man he was meeting with, right?
Yes, that was Cardinal Spellman.
Yeah, amazing. Well, listen, why don't we move on to an interesting, we got only 2 minutes before the break, and I just wanted to set this up because I want to talk about this in the next half hour. Behind the scenes of all these pedophile investigations, you found, and you've documented it before, you see this massive corruption at high levels. Behind the scenes you fell into a story that is so amazing, and I wanted to update it for people, and that was putting the Kennedy assassination into perspective and providing solid evidence of how it took place, as well as evidence that still's out there that's in the hands of that's in the hands of certain high-level bishops in the Vatican that shows that one of the accomplices actually committed the crime, leaving his final words to this bishop that you've tried to get a hold of. Now, a lot of what is in that statement was told to you when you took this man into custody over trying to kill another accomplice in the Kennedy assassination. And what it boils down to is that he was involved with certain things that really brought his demise. One, he wanted to change the Federal Reserve banking system. Two, the CIA wanted to restructure. Three, he was talking about this monolithic beast that connects with both supposed religious, and then geopolitical organizations to gain control of a country. And I think he backstabbed the people that put him into power. And it is amazing to me that all this evidence came out right there in front of everybody when you arrested this man. And I thought we'd spend some time talking about that in the next half hour. How does that sound to you, Jim?
Sounds good.
Now tell me, this guy that we want to talk about, he was a former cop, right?
Yes, there are a couple people that were involved. The main guy we're talking about, I assume, is Frank Sturgis.
Right.
Yes, and then there was the other individual. There was a second individual as a result of this that gave me the Vatican stuff, how that all tied together with the confession that Sturgis made to the cardinal.
This former New York police detective Jim Rothstein discussing the pedophile problem in our country. And I want to, before I get to Jim, I wanted to mention that you have to come and listen to Wednesday's show, because I do have on Noreen Gosch. We discussed the Johnny Gosch case and how Jim was involved in it. Noreen's going to come on Wednesday to discuss and update this story and tell about how she has been probably one of the few mothers in America that has really tried to stand up to this corruption. And her son now is in his late 30s, and she hasn't seen him since the last visit, and that was interesting because when he was in his, I believe it was maybe 5-6 years ago, maybe I'm wrong, but anyway, he came to her, and I asked Noreen, I said, why did Johnny not stay? And she said he can't. It was just a visit to kind of let her know that maybe to stop the investigation in a sense. He tried, but really behind this, Jim, didn't it kind of say, and just to digress here 1 minute, didn't that visit by Johnny Gosch kind of tell us all how mind control he was and how he really had no choice to go back, because if he did, he'd probably be killed, correct?
Not only that, what they're told that their whole families are going to be killed. And it was clearly a message sent by his going to see his mother. And I personally interviewed the man that was brought to Chicago to set the guidelines for his visiting his mother. He was not alone when he went to visit Noreen. So all these people who come up with this stuff that, well, he could have called the cops and that, why would he call the cops for help if they had refused to investigate his disappearance, and may in fact have had knowledge of it, as they did when the second boy was kidnapped, the Martin boy. They knew ahead of time that the kidnapping was going to take place, and they did absolutely nothing about it. So why in the world would Johnny Gosch call the cops? I mean, first of all, he can't be stupid, otherwise he would have never survived to go visit his mother. And that's what people have to understand. And I think it's just a great thing that you have Noreen on, because like I said, She's the only person I know that has stood up and fought for the truth, and didn't take any of the stuff that was handed out to make her think differently and brainwash her too. So I think it's great that you're going to have her on the show.
All right, and we'll continue this discussion Wednesday. Let's get to the story we want to talk about this half hour. Frank Sturgis. All right, let's start and go back and lay some groundwork for people and some evidence about how the Kennedy assassination took place, how you found out about it, how it was then covered up. Go ahead.
Well, there's a couple places I could start, but what I'll do is start with the original phone call I got telling me that Frank Sturgis was coming to town, to New York City, to assassinate Marita Lorenz, who had been the lover of Fidel Castro.
Okay, sounds like a great story, doesn't it? Well, go and check it out. Go and check out my interview that I did with him years ago regarding the Kennedy assassination and certain things that Jim found out while he was working with the New York Police Department. Things that really never got to the mainstream. Very interesting. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.